Okay, so you want to own a funeral home. On paper, it is the most guaranteed business ever invented. There are roughly 3.1 million deaths in the United States every year. That number is not shrinking. It is growing because 73 million baby boomers are aging into their late 70s and 80s. Your customer base is literally everyone. Demand is not seasonal. It is not cyclical. It does not care about recessions, interest rates, or fashion. Every single person in your market will, with 100% certainty, eventually need your service exactly once. No other business on earth can say that. It sounds like the safest business in the world. It is not. Here is the number that is quietly breaking this industry. In 2015, for the first time in American history, cremation passed burial. Today, the cremation rate is around 63%. By 2045, it is projected to hit 82%. Why does that matter? Because of what each option pays you. The median cost of a funeral with a viewing and burial is about $8,300. Add the vault most cemeteries require, and you are near $10,000. A direct cremation, no viewing, no ceremony, no casket, no embalming, runs between $1,000 and $3,500, and it is the fastest growing product in the entire industry. Same customer, same death. The revenue just dropped by up to 85%. Imagine owning a restaurant where every year a larger share of your customers walks in, orders a glass of water, and leaves. That is what is happening to the American funeral home. The customer did not disappear. The customer changed the order. By the end of this video, you will understand why an industry with the most predictable demand curve in all of business is closing locations every single year. You will understand why the thing you are actually buying when you buy a funeral home is not the building, not the hearses, and not the equipment. And you will understand the liability sitting inside the filing cabinets of almost every funeral home in America, obligations that transfer to you the day you sign, and that can quietly be worth more than the entire business. Let's start with what it costs to get in. First problem, you cannot just buy your way in. In nearly every state, a funeral home needs a licensed funeral director on staff. That license typically requires a mortuary science degree, a 1 to 3 year apprenticeship, and national and state board exams. If that person is not you, you are hiring one, and there is a nationwide shortage. Personnel is currently the #1 business challenge in the profession. Second problem, almost nobody builds a funeral home from scratch. This is an acquisition business, and here is why. A new building, a preparation room, refrigeration, a chapel, parking, vehicles. That all costs real money. A hearse alone runs $70,000 to over $100,000. A cremation retort, if you want your own crematory, adds 6 figures more. But the building is not the business. The business is the phone ringing. And the phone rings because of reputation, which takes a generation to build. So you buy an existing one. What does that cost? Funeral homes are valued on their earnings, typically 3 to 5 times sellers' discretionary earnings for a single location. The foundational metric is call volume, the number of funerals performed per year. A typical NFDA member funeral home handles about 113 calls per year. Run the math on a solid independent home doing 150 calls at $7,000 average revenue, and you have a $1 million revenue business. With the real estate, you are usually paying anywhere from $500,000 for a small rural operation to several million for a strong suburban location. And here is the catch buried inside that price. You are paying a premium for something called goodwill. The family name on the sign, the 60 years of trust, the relationships. It can account for 20 to 40% of what you pay. Goodwill has one defining feature. It does not automatically transfer. The community trusted the Hendersons. You are not a Henderson. Now let's talk about the product. Here is the fundamental constraint of the funeral business, and it is unlike any other industry. You cannot create demand. A restaurant can advertise and get more people to eat out. A gym can convince people to sign up. You cannot advertise more death. The number of funerals in your town this year is fixed. It was decided by demographics decades ago. Your only growth strategy is taking market share from the funeral home across town, in an industry where families pick a funeral home the way they pick a church, out of habit, loyalty, and grief. Most families make the call within hours of a death, under emotional duress, and they call the name they already know. Meanwhile, your cost structure is brutal. You are running a business that must answer the phone at 3 a.m. on Christmas. Bodies do not wait. That means staff on call around the clock, every day of the year. You are maintaining a building that looks like a mansion and functions like a clinic. Chapels, viewing rooms, a preparation room with medical-grade ventilation, refrigeration units, and a fleet of vehicles that get used a few hours a week but must always be immaculate. Your revenue is lumpy and your costs are fixed. A funeral home doing 113 calls a year is averaging just over 2 funerals a week. 2. Every dollar of overhead sits there whether the phone rings or not, and your pricing is federally regulated. Since 1984, the FTC funeral rule has required every funeral home to hand any customer an itemized general price list, and to accept a casket the family bought somewhere else, including online, without charging a handling fee. The casket, historically the highest markup item in the building, now competes with Costco. So where does the money actually come from? Here is the reframe that explains this entire industry. A funeral home does not really sell funerals. It sells one thing: the removal of decisions from the worst week of a family's life. Look at the price list. The single largest line item is usually not the casket. It is the non-declinable basic services fee, typically $2,100 to $2,500, which every family pays no matter what they choose. That fee is not for a product. It is for the director's expertise, the permits, the death certificate, the coordination. It is a fee for someone else handling it. Everything else stacks on top: embalming, facility use, the service car, the printed programs. Individually small, collectively the difference between a $1,500 cremation and an $8,300 funeral. The profitable funeral home is not the one that sells the fanciest casket. It is the one a grieving family trusts enough to say, "Handle everything." The smartest operators have understood the shift and rebuilt around cremation instead of fighting it. About 30% of funeral homes now run their own crematory, with another 10% planning to add one, because owning the retort means keeping the cremation fee instead of paying a third party. Some operators have gone full volume, high-throughput cremation businesses in cities like Houston and Miami running over 500 cremations a month, arranged mostly online and by phone. Low revenue per call, enormous volume, and a cost structure with no chapel and no hearse fleet. They are not running funeral homes. They are running logistics companies that happen to handle human remains. The traditional operator sitting in a big expensive building, watching the average sale shrink every year, is caught in between. Now let's talk about what is in the filing cabinets. For decades, funeral homes have sold preneed contracts, prepaid funerals. A widow walks in at 68, plans her own service, pays today, and the funeral home promises to deliver it whenever she dies. Americans put roughly $5 billion a year into these arrangements. The money is required by state law to sit in a trust or an insurance policy until the service is performed. Here is what matters if you are the buyer. When you buy a funeral home, every one of those promises transfers to you. The typical funeral home is carrying preneed obligations equal to roughly 140% of its annual revenue. A business doing $1 million a year usually owes about $1.4 million of future funerals it has already been paid for. You are not just buying a business, you are inheriting a queue of prepaid customers, some of whom paid decades ago. Now add the industry's most dangerous phrase: the guarantee. Many of these contracts locked in the price. A funeral sold for $6,000 in 2005 must be delivered at today's costs, no matter what the trust is worth. If the trust's investments underperformed while funeral costs inflated, you eat the difference. On every single contract, one by one, for years. And here is the part that should make you sweat. If the previous owner underfunded that trust, sloppily, or worse, deliberately, The shortfall is now your problem. Preneed fraud cases in this industry have reached into the hundreds of millions of dollars. The families have their receipts, the state has its regulations, and the person on the hook to perform those funerals is whoever owns the license now. You. This is why serious buyers audit the preneed book line by line, matching every trust balance against every contracted obligation before they even discuss price. An underfunded preneed liability discovered after closing is not a discount you missed. It is a bill that arrives one funeral at a time for the next 30 years. And all of that is happening inside an industry that is structurally shrinking. Run the forward math on that typical 113-call funeral home. If every call were a traditional burial, that is roughly $886,000 in annual revenue. At a 50-50 split of burial and full-service cremation, it drops to about $837,000. At 2045's projected 80% cremation, mostly full service, it falls to around $630,000. And if most of those cremations are direct, no service, no viewing, revenue can fall to roughly $300,000. Same building, same overhead, same 3 a.m. phone calls, 1/3 of the revenue. Here is the dark irony. The baby boomer death wave, the demographic surge every investor is counting on, is real. Annual deaths are projected to keep climbing for the next 2 decades. Volume is going up. But boomers are exactly the generation choosing cremation, simplicity, and celebration of life events at wineries instead of chapels. The industry is getting more customers and less revenue per customer at the same time. More funerals. Smaller funerals. That is the whole story in 4 words. The people who understand this math best are buying everything. Service Corporation International, a name most families have never heard, operates around 1,500 funeral homes and 470 cemeteries, roughly 16% of the U.S. market, under brands like Dignity Memorial and Neptune Society, usually keeping the trusted local family name on the sign. Behind SCI is a tier of private equity-backed platforms rolling up independents by the hundreds. They are buying for 2 reasons. Scale fixes the overhead problem, 1 call center, and 1 accounting office serving 50 locations. And the sellers are lining up. In a 2025 NFDA survey, 46% of funeral directors said they plan to retire within 5 years, many with no family successor. For a business built on a personal reputation, a corporate check is often the only exit. The independents that remain are competing against consolidators with cheaper capital, national marketing, and their own casket supply chains. Sound familiar? It is the gas station story, wearing a dark suit. The funeral home is one of the oldest businesses in every American town. It has survived wars, depressions, and pandemics because its demand curve is the one thing in economics that never bends. But the business you would buy today is not the business it was in 1990. The demand is guaranteed. The revenue is not. The building is impressive. The margins are not. The goodwill is the asset, and it walks out the door with the family that built it. The preneed book is either a loyal customer base or a slow-motion liability, and you will not know which until you audit every page. Death is the surest thing in the world. The funeral business is anything but. You decide.